Silent love. Writing about death brings me to love. For me, the two are intimately related. These are my thoughts on love, a subject that Rameshji rarely spoke about due to the misunderstandings and preconceived notions that exist on this topic. This was because whatever he would say would invariably be considered as talking about love that was a polar opposite of hate. Since we live within the framework of duality of every conceivable kind, up and down, left and right, night and day, pleasure and pain, me and the other, and so on, our default conditioning would be to think about love as on the end of the love-hate polarity. This is not the love Rameshji referred to. Even the concept of unconditional love is not really all that it's made out to be. I recall reading somewhere that a lady had come to see the great sage Ramakrishna Paramahansa and spoke about her unconditional love for her child. Ramakrishna said something to the effect that her love would truly be unconditional if she loved everyone's children as if they were her own. When asked about love, all that Rameshji would say was not to hate anyone. He would go on to explain that when there is no other to hate, then it truly means that there is no other, and when there is no other, then there is no me that is separate from the other. And when there is no me that is distinct from the other, consciousness is all there is. Was this an oversimplification? It may appear to be, but it represents a deep truth. When hate is eliminated, its polar opposite, love, is eliminated too. What is left then? Love that rises above the pairs of opposites. One could perhaps call it transcendental love. I found Osho's words in the Book of Secrets quite apt. But what happens in a Buddha-like consciousness when love and hate both disappear? What happens? It is difficult to express what happens, but whatsoever has been felt around Buddha is more like love without hate. It has been felt around Buddha. It is not that Buddha feels it so. Buddha cannot feel love now because he cannot feel hate. He cannot feel love, but around him, everyone has felt a deep love flowing. We can describe it as love without hate, but then the quality is different. End quote. In other words, this love that Rameshji pointed to is not a personal love as such, but rather a love that transcends personhood. He preferred calling it an absence of separation. As he would say, love is the absence of separation, and separation is the absence of love. In that sense, true love is impersonal, which means there is no person loving another person. If it were that, then we would be back in the love-hate polarity. It is almost everyone's experience that love can turn into hate, and hate in turn can turn into love. It is all circumstantial when it comes to love between two persons. This switch between the polarities can happen from moment to moment, depending on what happens between the two individuals and how it is perceived, as for me or against me. These moments can be minutes apart, or even weeks, months, or years apart. The absence of separation simply means the presence of capital P, presence. And this presence allows the other to be exactly the way they are, the way God created them. It is the total acceptance of the other without any judgments on how they should be and how they ought to be. To quote Osho again, really, the polar opposites disappear and simple presence remains. Buddha is a presence, not a mood. You are moods, not a presence. Sometimes you are hate, sometimes you are love, Sometimes you are anger, sometimes you are greed. You are moods. You are never a pure presence, and your consciousness goes on being modified by your moods. Each mood becomes the master. It modifies the consciousness, cripples it, changes it, colors it, deforms it. A Buddha is without moods. He is a simple presence. If you are sensitive, you will feel love flowing from him. You will feel compassion. How is this presence achieved? There is no question of achieving it, as it is always ever present. It shines through when the veil of personhood, the belief that I am the doer and so are others, is lifted. It happens with the death of the thinking mind, or the ego and its sense of personal doership, which delves into the dead past and creates an imaginary future. All thoughts and feelings of hatred, malice, jealousy, envy, blame, condemnation, pride, arrogance, guilt, shame, and so on disappear into thin mist, revealing presence, which one could call impersonal love. Yet nothing could be more intimate than impersonal love, for there is no person as such standing on the pedestal of love and giving it. Thus, the death of the ego with its personal sense of doership is the birth of true love. In this sense, death and love are intimately connected. The hallmark of this presence is quietude or stillness, one could say. But people often mistake quietness or simply presence for a lack of love. It is said, love should be expressed in words. Now, what happens if someone is not expressive by nature, by their conditioning? Does it mean they don't love? During my childhood years, on many occasions, I was chided for not expressing love. Deep down, only I knew the love I felt. We place too much emphasis on the spoken word. I am reminded of Naomi Scher, who exuded a silent love. She was of a quiet disposition and didn't speak much, from what I recall. She was all of 13 years old when she lost her life along with her father Alan in the terrorist attacks in Mumbai in 2008. They were part of a group that had come along with the American mystic Master Charles Cannon and were dining at the Oberoi Hotel when the terrorists came and fired indiscriminately. They died on the spot. Alan was an experienced Vedic astrologer and a long-term transcendental meditator, made famous by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He was the vice president of the Synchronicity Foundation founded by Cannon at that time. During the days he was in Mumbai, he used to come over to my office and do his work. At one of our chai breaks when we were sitting together, he mentioned to me that I would be writing many books based on what he saw in my horoscope. I laughed at this disbelievingly. Even my first book was not out yet, though it was in the pipeline. On a prior trip, he had mentioned to me that he harbored a wish to die in India. That is precisely what happened. Life is stranger than fiction indeed. On the 2nd of February 2009, a couple of months after their passing on the 26th of November, I received a message from Nan Umriga through her son Carl, who was in the spirit realm. Spiritual seekers on the path of Advaita may not find this in harmony with Advaitic teachings, and my teacher was also of this view and didn't give much credence or importance to the afterlife, as it were. After all, it simply perpetuates the story of the me. Despite this, when someone once asked him about his views on the spirit realm, he replied that anything was possible in the realm of consciousness. So, I guess it is what it is, and in that spirit, I have reproduced the message below, which came to me from Carl Umriga. Dear Gautam, your friends made their peace with God a long time ago, so there is no question of them having to go through a long period of rest or a prolonged sleep state here. They have surfaced in the period of a few days and are not at all surprised as the turn of events that have brought an end to their earthly lives. A life of love and dedication, a life lived for the benefit of others and their ready acceptance of what has transpired, is the reason for their uplifted souls. They have not been affected by the suddenness of their passing, just a feeling of relief that there was really no suffering at all. You have their undying gratitude for being there in the last few days of their earthly lives and for sharing thoughts and feelings, as well as so many happy moments with them. Alan is now here to say a few words to you. He says, "My dear friend, I do not intend to go into the whys and wherefores because you understand it all so well. I am not going to elaborate on my life or the meaning of my departure. I only want to convey to you my appreciation for the beautiful welcome you gave us. My daughter took to you as if you were indeed part of our family. You have a wonderful aura around you, Gautam. You will be responsible for getting many more onto the spiritual path and making them realize that life is indeed a gift. I do cherish the times spent with you, and I want you to know this. Naomi is now stretching herself to be able to get a word in. She says to tell you that she is going to make a rainbow for you and send it to you in the next few days. Lots of love, Alan. Love, Carl." As I write this, I can't help but fondly recall father and daughter. Alan had gifted me a big box of incense sticks for my birthday, which was 2 days prior to the attacks. I never got the opportunity to thank him for it. It was too late. When I lit each stick at my temple altar every morning, I thought of them and how their lives went up in smoke, quite literally. And Naomi's enigmatic smile would bring a smile to my face, especially when I recall the question she posed to my mother, "Am I spiritual?" Aghori Vimalananda was quite right when he said that the fire of the tongue burns what you speak through it. I was relieved, in fact, elated when I read this. In any case, the spoken word is the 4th stage of sound and only what we hear. The 4 stages are para, pashyanti, madhyama, and vakhari. These represent the source, the feeling I am alive, then the arising of a thought due to the mind's functioning, and then words flowing through the mind as speech. Simply put, one could say that a thought arises from the source, gets formulated in words, and is then spoken through the mouth. Here is Vimalananda in his own words. To know how long a blessing or curse will last, you must first know in which form of speech, vani, it was delivered. Vakhari, which is oral, madhyama, which is mental, pashyanti, which is visual, or para, the telepathic. Vani, oral curses and blessings are almost worthless because your tongue burns whatever it speaks. This is why speaking mantras aloud dissipates their shakti. Even speaking someone's name too much spoils its sweetness. Even saying, "I love you" aloud is far less meaningful or effective than saying it mentally, or looking at someone and letting the love flow through your eyes, or, best of all, using telepathy. In the old days, the real gurus would bless their children with paravani. Those blessings would go directly to the target and hit the mark. Their effect would last a lifetime, and nothing else needed to be done. That is the power of paravani." End quote. Ramana Maharshi said that if words were considered powerful, how much more powerful would the silence, the space they have emerged from, be? Silence is ever speaking. It is a perennial flow of language. It is interrupted by speaking. These words obstruct the mute language. There is electricity flowing in a wire. With resistance to its passage, it glows as a lamp or revolves as a fan. In the wire, it remains as electric energy. Similarly, also, silence is the eternal flow of language, obstructed by words. End quote. He was, of course, referring not just to keeping quiet, but rather to the silence of the thinking mind. But alas, all we value is the spoken word. Actions do speak louder than words, but sometimes the actions of a person get overlooked because the other is expecting words of love. Then one misses the forest for the trees. A classic case of action speaking louder than words. I recently met a spiritual master at his ashram in the hills. It was the first time I was meeting him, yet he met me with much warmth and affection, like he did with everyone else. I spent some hours with him. A devotee came and offered the rest of us some prasad. It was very tasty, though it left the palm of my hand covered with ghee. I was sitting right next to the master, to his right. While he was speaking with someone else, he reached out for my hand. I was quick to withdraw it, and it took him a bit by surprise. Immediately, I offered the explanation that I didn't want to dirty his hand. To my utter surprise, he responded by grabbing my hand and wiping my palm with his own a few times till it was cleansed of all the grease and remnants of the prasad. He said, "Now your palm is clean," and proceeded to hold my hand. One of his devotees, on hearing this conversation, came rushing with napkins, not just for me, but for all who had the prasad. Another devotee promptly got up and took the empty crinkle paper from our hands, on which the prasad was served. While actions speak louder than words, the presence of simply being speaks louder than actions but gets neglected because it is silent and our mind is structured to be drawn to movement and forms and not silence itself. For example, when we read a book, our focus is on the words and not on the blank paper on which the words appear. My teacher would often say, consciousness in action is understanding, and understanding in action is witnessing. To take a leaf out of his book, I would like to think that witnessing in action is love. To me, the above incident represented love in action, which can only happen when there is an absence of separation. On another note, if you want to know the essence of a master and his teaching, take a look at not only his actions, but the actions of his devotees. This may sound like a cliche, but it is true that love is a total acceptance of what is, which includes accepting people exactly the way they are. For the understanding is that whatever traits we wish were not there, and are there not because of the person, but rather the person's nature, that is, their genetics and conditioning, both of which they have no control over. In other words, it is the nature which God, the source, consciousness, call it what you may, created. This vision or understanding leads to a revelation, expressed so beautifully by Joel Goldsmith when he says that our relationship is no longer with people, but rather with God. When this happens, jnana transforms into bhakti. I like to think of it as the ultimate bhakti. When we see God in everyone, when our relationship is with God, can there be a greater bhakti than this? If only we could live with the understanding that we are all pieces on the chessboard of life, moved by a higher force between the polarities of black and white. which represent this world of duality. Some are pawns, others knights, bishops, and so on. At the end of the game, no matter who wins or loses, all the pieces are put into the same box. Having this understanding in daily living would result in a felt oneness with being, to borrow Eckhart Tolle's phrase. The result is a natural arising of compassion for fellow beings, as well as oneself. At the end of his life, perhaps in his last months, one spiritual seeker asked Rameshji what his famous last words would be in a nutshell. He promptly replied, love each one as if you created them. That would be true love, in my estimation.